Sibos 2017, Building for the Future.
Good morning, everybody. I am David Hughesby. I am the security maven for Hyperledger. And today we're doing a session on blockchains and their impact on security and whether they increase them or create new challenges in the financial sector. And basically everywhere else they're being applied these days. I'd like to start off, first of all, going down the line here and allowing my panelists to introduce themselves. Tom, you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Tom Jessup. I am president of a company called Chain. We're a San Francisco-based enterprise blockchain company. We provide our own protocol, which we call Chain Core, and a series of tools on top of that that allow financial institutions to develop applications. We're lucky to count companies like Visa, Citibank, and NASDAQ as customers. We also see a lot of interest in what we're doing amongst a growing number of fintech companies and platform operators who view blockchain technology as being both a future-proof and tamper-proof system of record for balances and other financial applications. And we're excited to be here and talk a little bit about security.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Blythe Masters. I'm the CEO of Digital Asset. This is a New York-based financial enterprise software firm, building also distributed ledger-based or blockchain-inspired technology solutions for large-scale financial market infrastructure operators and their customers, the likes of banks and others. We are working with a number of customers, including DTCC and the Australian Stock Exchange, to put into production blockchain-inspired technologies for applications ranging from clearing and settlement of cash equities markets through to fixed income and a number of other similar use cases.
Hello, good morning. I'm Alicia Pertusa, and I'm head of digital transformation in corporate investment banking in BBVA. Digital transformation could mean a lot of things. What we do is try to make innovation close to the business or connect the business, corporate investment banking, with innovation. And we all know that all this digital transformation started with retail, but it is already impacting corporate investment banking. And doing two very different things that are complementary. So looking at the disruption and things like blockchain that could eventually have a very big impact in the business we run, but then also implementing projects that are more closer to the business, to the run the business, if you like, things like automation or becoming more STP stage through processing in our products.
Hi, my name is Ikuma Ueno, senior digital strategist at Mizuho Financial Group. My department is called the Digital Innovation Department, which I'm responsible for looking after all the state-of-the-art technology venture companies, looking at the ecosystem of each country and promoting that to Japan ecosystem. I'm also the specialist for looking at the blockchain DLT initiative across the Mizuho Financial Service Group, which consists of securities, trust banking, investment banking, etc.
Good morning. I'm Tom Schuck from CLS Bank. I'm the CIO there. CLS is a financial market utility. We do FX settlement daily for our 66 members, for 24,000 third parties that come through the 66 members in 18 currencies around the world. We've embarked on a strategy to introduce a distributed ledger for a new service that we've recently announced called CLS Net. Security and resiliency is obviously a big part of that, and it's an expectation from our members, from the industries and the supervisors and regulators that oversee us. So this is a subject that's kind of near and dear to our heart and something that we're in the process of implementing right now. So I really look forward to this conversation this morning.
Thank you. Excuse me. So I've asked all of these panelists to join us because all of their organizations are actively developing and deploying distributed ledger technology in their businesses. And so it's an interesting conversation to have about as things change, as you're moving to a distributed ledger world, a blockchain world, how things are the same and how things are different. Because this is mostly security-related stuff, I think I'm going to start with a general question for the panel. How has your security stance had to change? Have you had to hire new people? Have you had to restructure your security processes? Have you had to change any of your thinking? What has really bubbled up for you, security-related wise, as you've moved into applying these technologies? Why don't we start with, I'm going to pick on Akuma.
We haven't really updated putting in distributed technology to a production system, and most of the projects out there, it has been stopped about the proof of concepts. And of course, when you go to the product, the step where you have to go to the proof of concept, the pilot, or maybe into production, you need, of course, you need to security. Look at the security problems as well. And we haven't been in the stage yet to hire any security people who are specialists on looking at distributed technologies. But thinking that the technology is always will be leveraged using the internet and all the cloud services, it's inevitable for us to look at the security perspective. And unfortunately, we're not in that stage yet.
Blythe?
So I think a couple of things. So I think your question was whether we've had to change approach or direction in light of security concerns. And in our case, the answer to that is no. And I think the reason for that is that we have been developing systems to specification for market infrastructure providers who themselves are highly regulated and are operating systemically consequential platforms that are obviously fiercely guarded and carefully regulated with a view to ensuring their stability, their availability, and so on. And so a security criteria, or a series of them, has always been the starting point, not the ending point of the system design that we've been working from. So in the case of, for example, working to replace the post-trade infrastructure for a national cash equities market, which is the case in Australia, there is an existing body of regulation and regulators who oversee and ensure standards for that infrastructure today. And the system that has been designed took into account those standards with a view to, at a minimum, meeting them and generally exceeding them, from the outset. And the idea here is that the system will be put into production in that kind of environment, and so has been designed with those concerns in mind. So it's really a case of starting with the problem as an articulation, a set of specifications and a set of requirements, working with a customer who essentially has zero appetite for risk in this space, and a regulator who has even less, if it's possible, and building a solution that meets those requirements, rather than imagining a system and then throwing it at a problem and then discovering, well, it doesn't work. If you started with the original Bitcoin blockchain, ingenious and brilliant as it is and was, and try to run a national market infrastructure for post-trade clearing, settlement, corporate actions, and so on using it, you're going to have security problems as well as many other problems, obviously. But that's not where we started. We're not trying to fit a blockchain into a regulated infrastructure. We start with a regulated infrastructure and design something that has blockchain-inspired components that solve for that.
Interesting. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I have a similar answer. It doesn't really change what we do. As a systemically important firm, and the place in a handful of designated firms, for example, under Dodd-Frank, we worry about and invest and innovate in security and resiliency every day. That's just what we do. That's doesn't have to be on the sign on the elevator bank. That's just what we do at CLS. What I'd say is there's really a distinction when you introduce the blockchain or the distributed ledger technology, and I think about kind of three aspects. One around confidentiality, the second one around data integrity, and the third one around availability. And in availability, I would highlight things like resiliency and the robustness, including things like cybersecurity. So from like a lot of the things in engineering, and when you introduce new technologies, there's always trade-offs and things shift. And I don't know that it shifts for the better or for the worse, but it shifts. So in terms of something like confidentiality, that gets more complicated because what used to be in a central database in 1, 2, or 3 places in a traditional kind of 2+1 resiliency model, for example, that all changes because now you have n number of nodes. N could be 10, N could be 1,000, N could be 1,000,000. So in terms of confidentiality of data, it just gets harder because the data is distributed in more places. So therefore, it just becomes a much more complex environment. If you think about availability, it's a real uptick. It's a positive. And one of the things that we've been excited about and wanted to learn more about and invest in was the resiliency aspect of it, because you never want to go down. You never want to have any part of the system drag the rest of the system or the service down. So we're very optimistic about the resiliency capabilities, and the fact that you distribute the data into n number of nodes, n number of places, is a real uptick in terms of resiliency. Data integrity, I think there probably is a slight uptick in improvement in that area, but it really depends on how you implement it. You know, we had a conversation before this panel, and you know, there's a lot of talk about how you build things and how you know, what products you use and how you engineer the solution. But if you put that in practice, you put that into production, and you don't have the right kind of controls in place, then you're going to open a door. And so things that you thought you engineered properly, if they're not administered and controlled and monitored and assured constantly, you're going to open the door and create vulnerabilities that you didn't expect. So again, I think the integrity point is that it probably does help you, but only if you implement it properly and only if you have the right controls in place and understand exactly what risk you need to manage associated with introducing the technology.
I was going to say that even though we come from very different backgrounds, all of us here work for either financial institutions or companies that serve financial institutions or financial infrastructure. And for all of us, the level of compliance, how solid our security has to be from every perspective, the requirements are extremely high, right? So there's a lot at stake. So, and building on what you were saying as well, we just have to make sure that all the pieces in these DLT projects, all these security pieces are there. And some of them are the typical or classical security pieces, and we're talking about physical security of the nodes and the communication, and we're talking about logic security in terms of the consensus and the privacy. But there's also things, yes, like management of keys, and we were talking about that at the beginning. It's not going to be something new for the banks, but it's true that we have to understand the implications of this new system, and our traditional teams that run security have to get comfortable with that as well. And auditing, I mean, and that's also, I mean, all the hacks and all these things of smart contracts, that's like pieces that have always been there, and we just have to make sure that we're making the same checks that we do with traditional security. And I guess for that, it helps a lot, things like, I mean, like you guys in Hyperledger are doing, setting the standards, because this is all very new. And I know standards sounds extremely boring, but it's actually, I think, the key to ensure that all this security is achieved. Because we all have to be very, 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 I wouldn't say comfortable, even more than comfortable, before any of this new technology goes into production. Because as I say, we are either financial institutions, serve financial institutions, or market infrastructure. No mistakes should be done there.
Tom, you got a thought on this one?
Yeah, I mean, all interesting points. I guess what I'm thinking about is, I'm going to make a statement. Hopefully it's true. I'm just thinking about it. I don't think that blockchain technology in the enterprise per se introduces new security risks based on what other folks have said, right? Most institutions know how to manage keys. They know how to manage physical security. And so it's really just making sure that as participants in the space or users in the space, we actually know the means of transmission of this new technology into an existing security framework. In some respects, I mean, blockchain technology is more secure, right? The concept of an immutable database where folks can't go in and actually change records is important, right? It eliminates the risk, for example, of someone having unauthorized access to a system or getting access to a system and changing or extracting data. And then when you think about the fact that it's append-only, the fact that you need cryptographic proofs or signatures to add to that database, again, those are capabilities that most financial institutions are very familiar with and have been familiar with for a long time. So in some ways, if done properly, it's actually more secure. I think what we're going to talk about in a few minutes is that it does push the security requirement out to the edge where these transactions are originated and signed into a blockchain network.
You're right. We are going to talk about that, but not right now. Blythe, you had mentioned that we should be designing systems from the requirements, and if and only if a distributed ledger fits the system, the solution, right? That's the right way to go about selecting that as one of your the design of your solution, right? I wanted to ask the panel if it's unanimous that the security aspects of distributed ledgers was key in your decision to adopt the technology. Like, did you want to do it because you had a distributed requirement that was more valuable than, you know, the potential security risks or the security aspects of the distributed ledger, or was it the security that really got you looking into it? Or is it a bunch of other stuff? I don't know.
Well,
Fill me in.
Speaking for, so we're a manufacturer and a designer of solutions as opposed to an entity that decides to implement them, right? So our customers get to make those decisions. Speaking from the experience of the thought processes that we've had from our customers, I would say that, as you've already heard, security viability has been a sine qua non. It's sort of it's a threshold issue, and if you can't get comfortable that security standards will be at or better than the status quo, and not just that way now, but that way into the future, so you have, you know, forward secrecy and so on, then the conversation sort of stops there. The sort of the positive incentive to adopt blockchain solutions, you know, really relate to efficiency, the ability to add new capabilities, to generate new lines of business, to eliminate certain risks, operational errors, and so on. But at the end of the day, if that comes at the expense of introducing incremental security risks in an environment like the one that we're operating in now, it's just refer to beginning of conversation and, you know, and exit stage left. I think in particular, I more or less agree with what Tom said, but in that I don't think that blockchain solutions inherently introduce risk, and they may generally inherently mitigate them or improve on them. But I do think that it somewhat depends on the design and the implementation choices. So I'll give you an example, which is that there are some approaches to the use of blockchain for enterprise financial services where the information of every participant is shared and replicated across multiple nodes. That's the traditional approach that the original blockchain used. Yeah. Of course, you cannot share sensitive financial information like that in regulated financial markets, so you have to ensure privacy and confidentiality. Now, how you do that could potentially result in introducing a new set of risks.
Sure.
Because it is, you know, both unwise and in some cases illegal to have the data of a Goldman Sachs residing on the server of a JP Morgan, or the data of a customer in France showing up in a server, you know, outside of France under certain circumstances. And this one of the ways in which people have responded to that is to say, don't worry, we'll encrypt everything. Now, by the way, the law generally doesn't say you're not allowed to share, you know, information or export it, except if you encrypt it. It says, you know, you're not allowed to do it. And if anyone has been reading the newspapers recently, of course you have, you know that not only are existing encryption algorithms and protocols vulnerable. In fact, you know, we read just this week that it's no longer safe to use, you know, Wi-Fi with a mobile device, or at least not as safe as we thought it was. But more importantly, every other newspaper you read is telling you how many billions of dollars is being invested in the delivery of quantum computing, which, you know, most people concur would defeat most modern encryption algorithms currently widely in use. And we're not just talking about blockchain; we're talking about, you know, defense and everything else. to the extent that these solutions become scalable. So if your blockchain solution involves sharing your multiple participants' data with everybody else and just protecting it with encryption, think again, because that's the kind of unanswerable question that a regulator or a risk-averse market infrastructure provider is simply just not going to be able to tolerate. What happens if someone throws a quantum computing diffusion algorithm at this and succeeds, and now everybody has everybody else's information because we shared it everywhere? So the answer is don't share it. You segregate the data and use the blockchain component carefully to share information that is not the actual transaction data, but just a proof thereof or a notification thereof. And there are some other solutions as well. So the reality is this is not a simple answer. It's a complicated, design-specific, architecture-specific solution, and you need to have security and architecture design at the core of your thinking from the beginning. In order to be really confident in answering these kinds of questions.
Yeah, totally. So you alluded to you mentioned in your answer there that you embarked on a conversation with regulators about trying to explain your solution and why their concerns were alleviated from your design. Does anybody else have any experiences having that ongoing conversation with regulators about why your solution that includes a distributed ledger still meets the requirements of the regulated environment? Does anybody else have a?
We do participate with regulators, and I would have to say that in our core geographies, they are really eager to learn and eager to participate with us, with financial institutions in projects. I guess, a couple of thoughts here. One of the key learnings is you have to engage them from the very beginning, so in the very initial inception phases, because for many reasons. Also, the main reason is because they know very well the business they regulate, so they can give you very good ideas or ways to frame the DLT solution. But also to make them feel that they are, because they should be, part of the solution from the very beginning, because otherwise having the regulatory approval of a new technology, it's difficult. I also understand that it's very important. It's new for all of us. And the regulators, my experience is that they really appreciate that we share our learnings, that we teach them in a way, or that we bring our open questions to them as well. And my feeling is that even though there are a lot of potential challenges from a regulatory perspective, my feeling is that they do see the opportunity in blockchain solutions as well. In terms of real-time and transparency and access to the data, instead of having to wait for the reports that financial institutions send them, now they can have access to the real-time data that is produced and to the raw material, so to call it. Also in terms of automation, what I see with them, and in very specific cases in capital markets, is that they actually see that, talking about smart contracts, and it has to be very simple smart contracts. That would be also my learning. We have to start with something super, super simple. But the way regulators are seeing this is that they can help them automate functions, automate processes. And regulators are also eager to find efficiencies. So, we're all struggling for more efficient processes, right? So I see that they do see this technology as a way to automate their processes. And also in terms of how systems are replicated and there is no one single point of failure, they see that also as a potential gain. Of course, many challenges, many open questions, and what's the jurisdiction in decentralized environment? What's the jurisdiction that is going to apply? How can we ensure data privacy? GDPR, the right to be forgotten. How is that going to work with something that cannot be deleted? So there are a lot of questions. But my experience is that they're probably, maybe because there's been so much regulation in the past in capital markets or banking overall, I think they are excited about this as an opportunity to get some benefit for the industry as a whole.
Tom?
Yeah, I always like the regulator question when it comes to introducing technology. So I think we should just level set a couple things. And I'm not speaking for a regulator, but maybe suggesting a way to think about it and to talk about it. First of all, the regulator is not just one collective body, right? There's many regulators in different jurisdictions with different mandates and priorities and remits, right? There's not just this regulator, right? Second of all, in different regulatory bodies, there's obviously different constituencies. So when somebody says we spoke to a regulator, did you speak to the policy people doing research? Did you speak to the RTGS operator who runs the payment system? Did you speak to the supervisor team that oversees your institution? Again, these are large, complex institutions, and to kind of say there's one and they all kind of do one thing and think collectively is probably a bit misleading. I'd also say, in terms of regulatory views, there's constantly more and more published. I think they've been very clear on a couple of points, is that there's a major difference and distinction between an important service and something that's systemically important. And I think that the view that they have and the assurances that they want around your understanding of the risk and how you're going to operate these services, vary depending on whether it's systemically important or not. And in a lot of ways, they want assurances because that's their job. They need to make sure that the financial markets of the world remain stable. And as you introduce and evolve and move forward with platforms in an industry, that we understand the risk and we can actually manage it. So it's not this kind of gotcha situation here. Yes, they're supportive. Yes, there's, in doing research for this panel, I found virtually every major international body and regulatory body have published something around blockchain or DLT, security included, in the last 6 to 9 months. You can find it everywhere. The ECB wrote a paper in the last week from their T2S DLT task force. And they just said, look, if you're going to do this for something that's important, payments, settlement, clearing, collateral movements, then we want assurances that you bring, and can operate this in a way with the resiliency, including cyber, that we expect from platforms like this. So I hope we can kind of demystify that a little bit, because I think they have a job to do. They is a very collective term, and I think that everybody wants to look for ways to improve the marketplace, whether that's based on security or resiliency or just overall efficiencies. There's no kind of general resistance to those things. Those are important topics, and they want what we want, which is a stable and evolving marketplace.
Yeah, I would just say, maybe coming back to something you were asking about earlier, which I think, to paraphrase, was something along the lines of, is security a feature that is designed? Do people make decisions on technology or picking blockchain technology based on the perceived security benefit?
Yes.
And I think we're an enterprise software provider, so we provide tools to financial institutions. We obviously have to be aware of their requirements and the regulatory requirements, but we ourselves are not regulated. What we are seeing, however, for new initiatives within banks and also new companies entirely, we're seeing more of a trend towards adopting blockchain data models as a foundational system of record for a business. Now, there are many reasons for that. Obviously, the business reasons are things like the ability to avoid reconciliation issues if you get counterparties and others onto that system. But there is a security aspect to it. People recognize that if done properly, there are some benefits in maintaining transactional data in a blockchain data structure as opposed to other types of structures. And I won't get into the litany of hacks and other things that have recently happened, particularly here in the US, which are known to everyone. But there is this perception, which I think is true and will evolve, that storing information in this context gets you slightly a level up in terms of security, and then obviously, to Blythe's earlier point, it depends on implementation and everything else. So we are seeing clients that are making foundational choices, and security is part of that decision.
Yeah.
So when we're doing some proof of concept for our institution, there are some regulatory burdens and other critical drawbacks that we have seen already. For instance, for the Japanese law, to give you some example, you're not allowed to make the encrypted data as an official account balances or make a account book for the security transfers. And when we've done the proof of concept or pilot test for the trade finance project, there was a critical drawback that, according to the Act of International Carriage of Goods by Sea, you're not allowed to make a bill of lading to be digitized. It has to be in a physical manual paperwork. In a nutshell, it's the regulation and the current standards is not meeting the criteria, or it's not compatible with the current modern technologies. And just because we have drawback on that, we can't just abandon any use cases. We just have to consider we have to work together with the regulations and in order to motivate them to change it to meet the criteria of the current standards, current technologies.
Interesting. So that's interesting that they're still requiring paper.
Yeah.
the internet's been around a while. So Tom, you also brought us back to security, and to get to the point that you set me up for earlier, with distributed ledgers, one of the benefits and potentially one of the drawbacks of the security is that you have to push key management and the security out to the edges, right? And if you're talking about a consortium where the only participants there are banks, they know how to handle keys. But we're seeing applications of distributed ledger technology into all kinds of consortiums. And you're now involving organizations and sometimes even individuals who don't have the long history of that level of security and understanding the risks and the tools that are available to manage that risk. Have any of you run into that situation with your projects?
I think generally, and I'd love to hear from the other panelists, I still think it's early in terms of, there are networks that have been instantiated, but are they really networks, or do they have the potential to become networks? But in terms of having dozens or hundreds of people sending transactions into a blockchain-based system, I think we're not there yet. So I think a lot of what we think about is, what is the way that we can facilitate creation of that network? There are obviously lots of considerations. There are business considerations. Does this business even make sense or deliver ROI for participants? And then there are the secondary considerations, like how do we actually propagate the technology at the edges that makes a blockchain? And so we think a lot about things like supporting everything ranging from on-premise HSMs or key management systems to delivering a key management system in the cloud, so that maybe the less sophisticated, or maybe conversely folks that are more comfortable with cloud, can use a cloud-based service to connect to a network and sign transactions. And I think a lot of our work now is trying to optimize what are those service offerings, and how can we allow our partners to propagate them quickly so they can develop the network. I think coming back to use cases involving individuals or people that really know nothing about this sort of thing, I just haven't thought about it. And I think about all of the well-publicized cases of folks having their private keys stolen and their Bitcoins or Ethereum stolen. I think that's like a whole nother discussion. That's just fraught with a lot of risk, and there are other security considerations which I think extend well beyond what can be done in the enterprise. So I don't have any strong views there, but I think that becomes extremely complicated. I think the early users of this technology will be folks that I think de facto have a strong security stance and ability to manage their environment securely. So and then we'll see what happens after that.
So you don't think that pushing it out to the edges is actually hindering the expansion of your network and the adoption of new participants at this point?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think that in some ways, I don't mean to diminish the technology. In some ways, the technology is the least of it, right? I think, and we were talking about this, off stage earlier. I think that there are lots of use cases that probably shouldn't be using a blockchain, or there are interesting POCs in the lab, but when you actually have to get them implemented, the cost to do that, you still have to connect the shiny new thing to the old thing you've been running in the back office for 40 years. And then, by the way, you have to get all of your counterparts and customers involved. So I think there are many more social and economic issues around getting these networks to scale. The technology and the security is very important, but that's not a first order problem in my mind.
It's a human problem.
It's a human problem, right?
Blythe?
So I fundamentally agree with everything Tom just said, and that the applications that we're working on are enterprise applications. So the question of imagining retail or consumer level interaction isn't something that has had to be addressed. I would say a couple of things. One is that the propagation of higher standards of key management and security management for enterprise is something that everyone knows they have to do anyway, and it's absolutely got nothing to do with blockchain per se. It's a bridge that has to be crossed. All you have to do is, again, read the newspapers every day to understand that that is a requirement in order to defend the institution and its interactions with many systems, externally, interactions with the internet, not just blockchain-based systems. So I would say, in certain respects, the blockchain evolution or revolution is helping advance that. And it's brought R&D and focus to this area in a way that's constructive and that will have benefits that go well beyond distributed networks and blockchain-based systems. But generally, I agree with everything that Tom said.
Alicia? You have any thoughts on this?
Yes, I was thinking that, just on what you were saying, that actually the most difficult thing to solve is not the technology. I mean, the most difficult consensus to reach is not going to be the DLT consensus. It's going to be the business consensus. And we need that first, which is also kind of what is the problem we're solving for, right? So solve the business consensus, the business problem. Then also the regulatory angle. If the regulators are not on board, no matter how cryptographically secure this mathematically is, there has to be an acknowledgement by the regulators that this has all the regulatory and legal requirements, right? So I guess we have to solve for the business, we have to solve for the regulation, and of course the technology, but I'm less concerned about the technology, to be honest. The technology will get there. In terms of security, it will get there in terms of throughput, in terms of number of transactions that had to be processed by second. We will get there. What is most difficult, in my opinion, what is making this technology not scale yet is the business consensus, or is the business case, or is the network effect. At the end of the day, you can only reach the network effect if we agree on the guidelines and the scheme and the rules, the business rules, and then having the regulators on board for that. And then for me also, the key to make this scalable is that it has to integrate with the core. It has to integrate with everything we already have running in our institutions. If that integration is going to be expensive or painful, again, this is, even though it could bring a lot of technological benefits from security and efficiency, it's all going to be washed away the moment you have to integrate with your core. And there's no other way than to integrate it. And it's true that we have APIs, and we're all building for APIs, right? I mean, my institution is definitely focusing on architecture with API-first mentality, and I think we're all in the same road. But the integration is the key. And for that, we need standards like Swift, like software providers that already provide the core to the processes. Integrating DLT in that is already in our core will make the integration transparent, and then it will be possible.
Interesting. Any other thoughts, Tom, Kuma?
I totally agree with Tom, Blythe, and Alicia, and I just want to echo that the distributed ledger technology is so compatible with any of the financial services out there in terms of like retail, wholesale, custody, investment banking. You just fundamentally know what those departments or the company is creating the revenue or expenses, and what's driving those systems keep up and running. And before you penetrate the market, or before you look at the use cases where the distributed ledger technology will be taking places. And it's not as simple as just deploying this technology. You need to also understand that it has the potential of taking away somebody's jobs, per se. And you need to think about the reallocation. And when you have to propose this to more of the CXO and CEOs, you can't just say, hey, this is going to eliminate like 10,000 people in mass. We need to have a concrete strategic planning of saying, hey, we could reallocate these people to a salesperson or, service. Again, the system is already there, and then the regulation is rigidly updated decades by decades, and it's not as that simple just to introduce the technology. You also have to think how the system, how the people are related to each other with the other function on their institution.
So I'll make it unanimous and agree with Tom and Blythe on the panel. I guess as a sidebar, whenever I get an invitation to sit on a panel, I see Tom or Blythe or both, I just think, well, this is like the easiest gig in the world, right? They're going to answer all the hard questions really well, and then I can just say I agree with them. I agree with them. How could you not?
This is all coordinated beforehand, by the way.
Let me see if I could add a couple of things around consortium, because I think POC and consortium are probably something we see written about and published, if not daily, weekly, which is good, and it's an important part of the innovation process, and we're all trying to innovate in different ways. So I think that's good. But consortium, to me, and especially in the context of CLS, has to be really truly mutualized, and it has to be where institutions come together and they're equal. So you can't just be the biggest shareholder and have the loudest, the most say. You can't treat somebody differently. In a true consortium that's mutualized, you can't treat somebody differently because this is a large bank and that's a small bank. You can't treat somebody differently because the representative they put on the consortium is loud and get the kind of the squeaky wheel effect. You can't do that. So that's not the optimal use of a consortium. And the way that we operate at CLS, it is mutualized and it is equal. Every one of our 66 members are equal around the table. I think that's really, really important as you move from POC and into production, because there's so many different business challenges, as the panelists mentioned, and technology challenges. So I think I think when we think about consortiums and how you move important services and even systemically important services into production, you have to have a pretty pure definition of consortium. So that's one thing that I would throw out there. The other thing I would mention is that, and there's a lot of talk about POCs. There's probably less things moving in production. We benefit from both Tom and Blythe working on real applications and really moving serious services into production. But I think if you get to the point where the blockchains move beyond just kind of a record of call it air miles and loyalty points and hotel nights, right? Things that are interesting but not really important to the financial markets. I think we are going to have to fall back on people who know how to run these things and run them every day with the resiliency that you'd expect. There's a lot of attributes in the way that we're expected to run things in FMIs that just naturally have to carry over for everybody to be comfortable that these services are going to work properly. So I think that as this evolves and as we see more and more important services move forward, I think the attributes and the experience and every aspect of not only productionizing it, but taking it into production and running it in a resilient way for the foreseeable future is going to become hugely important. And I hope that CLS is actually well positioned to help on that.
Thank you. So I want to leave enough time for audience questions. And I think we have just enough time to do a 1-minute challenge. I want to go down the line, and I'll give you a minute to talk about what you think is the one thing we're not talking about, security related, or the most important thing, I guess. What did we not cover? Kind of just a closing statement. So I'm going to start on the far end, Tom. So we'll go back to CLS.
What we're not talking about.
Or just what's the most important thing? Security related, distributed ledger, is it important for us to be pressing on scalability and performance right now? Because everybody seems to be going into production. Or is it really, having that ongoing conversation with regulators? I mean, what is the most important thing that I want people to take away from this panel?
I think it's really about pace. You think about the Facebook mantra and the book that was written in 2014, which is move fast and break things. I don't think that's appropriate for I know it's not appropriate for what we do at CLS, and I know it's not appropriate for FMIs and other important services that are moving forward. I like the idea of move smart and improve things, right? I mean, I think this is much more about an evolution, not a revolution. I know there's some people probably on the second floor here in the fintech area that would disagree with me, but I'd prefer to move smart and improve things. And I think we do need to evolve things. We do need to roll services out. We need to learn from that. We need academics to beat on it. We need nonprofits to beat on it. We need to challenge ourselves constantly, but we need to move it at the right pace. And again, it comes down to the criticality of the service. But I think one of the things that kind of gets left out of the conversation is we just say, blockchain or regulator. It's kind of easy to lump things together. I think we need to unpack that a little bit, and I think we need to be able to evolve things, especially when they come to services that are systemically important and in most critical parts of the infrastructure in the world.
Kumar?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of constraints and regulatories, et cetera, but the most important thing, I think, to drive this technology from proof of concept and pilot into production is the momentum and gravity and all the inertia that's going to energy, the positive energy of supporting this DLT technology and blockchain. I mean, it's really hard for to encourage your workers and staff members and those important people to look carefully for this blockchain technology and deploying this technology, because it takes a long time to make it in production, and it's really hard to make them enthusiastic about this for those long terms. And what you need is these speed is definitely important, and I believe it's more important than what this technology is capable of. And sometimes it's important than the current security, how it will solve the current problems right now. I think the speed and the interest and the gravity is the most important part to make this flourish.
Lisha.
The word that comes to my mind is maturity. And so we've been talking about this technology for quite a few years already. And it all started with the open public blockchains. Now I think we're all talking about private ones, where a lot of the challenges that apply to the open blockchains are solved. But still, the maturity is being built up, and it's going to take time. Maturity in terms of the business case, maturity in terms of the regulators, and of course maturity in terms of the technology. But as I said, the technology, the only aspect that really worries me about technology is not the blockchain piece. It's the blockchain piece is just a piece, and it's going to be useless in itself. The blockchain piece, we have to solve for it, make sure it's reliable and scalable, but that piece in itself is useless if it's not connected to something here and something here. And those things that are going to connect to that are not going to be all blockchain, are going to be traditional legacy systems that run in our institutions. So again, going back to the word of maturity, that is going to take time. And I think with this technology, there's been a big hype, and maybe a lot of energy has been wasted on that, or is the risk that is being wasted on that. So I guess all of us have to make sure that I believe there is a lot of benefit in the technology. It's basically a different way in sharing information, right? And information is everything, data. So we just have to make sure that we pace our strength for this long run, because the maturity would eventually get there, but we have to work on the different pieces: business, regulation, and technology, with the angle of integration.
Two things. One is that I think on the question of the challenge of integration and building a network effect, people often assume that you have to wake up one morning and you have to have achieved perfection, in the sense that every participant in a network, in an ecosystem, has to have gotten religion, signed up, agreed standards, and integrated this new distributed network with their existing status quo. And that would be great, and if that's what we're waiting for, it's going to be a long wait. The reality is that where the fastest progress is being made, at least in our experience, is where a path to production that allows the coexistence of the status quo with the benefits of the new approach to continue for a period of time, so that market participants that do not wish to operate a node or become a direct market participant in a distributed network are able to continue to interact with the infrastructure in question in the same way that they have traditionally, which typically is message-based. So you think of your Swift or ISO messages, your fixed messages, or whatever is applicable to the local market structure. That is something that is viable and is a design feature of the system, for example, that we're pressing towards production in Australia, which decision has not yet been made. So I don't want to suggest that decision has been made, but it is a feature that helped sell the concept. Yeah. So that's number one point. Number 2 point is that picking up also on the question of maturity. Sometimes I think we're a little bit guilty of thinking that because we're involved in the first development of blockchain-inspired or DLT solutions, that we're somehow the first people to build enterprise-grade software.
We aren't.
We aren't. And actually, it has been done before,
Really?
and it has been deployed before by systemically consequential market infrastructures. And there are things like external independent security audits that have to happen before you put these things into production. And typically, if you're assessing an enterprise system for deployment in this context, you'll see a document that has 50, 60, 80 claims that talk about data integrity and mechanisms for recovery and high availability and choice of encryption or cryptographic protocols, et cetera, et cetera. And then someone goes and throws the best team that they can find in the world that's independent at that problem statement and tries to disprove every single one of those claims. And that is something you're going to see happening as systems move down the path to production. And I think we should all learn a lot from whether we see that happening or not. If we don't see it happening, that would be a very bad sign. And as we do see it happening, I think we should draw some comfort from the fact that this connected enterprise software has existed before, and there are many security aspects of that that involve vulnerabilities that have to be questioned and addressed and answered as blockchain-based solutions make their way along the path to production. And I think I am highly confident you're going to see that. You're going to see that coming.
Great, Tom. We're kind of running out of time for questions.
Yeah, 30 seconds. So basically, I agree with my fellow panelists. I think that I've been looking at the space and involved in the space for a couple of years, even before joining Chain, and I've seen a tremendous maturation, not only in terms of the technology, but also what institutions are doing, their facility with the technology, and really sort of honing in on actual use cases that drive value. The problem now is we can't get anything out of POC. We're starting to. And so it comes back to some of these social issues we talked about earlier. And I think the real challenge is, if we want to run and manage technology-driven businesses, we have to fund those businesses. We have to deal with failure in those businesses. And I don't mean in a regulatory way. I mean in terms of did the business model work or not. And I think having worked at a big bank for a long period of time, it's really hard to make that sort of commitment when there are competing priorities. And I'll leave you with one thing I heard, moving from banking to technology, talking to someone who is on our board, a venture investor, and he was talking about a company and said, that was the best failure I've ever seen. And I said to myself, I don't think I'd ever hear that in banking. But there's some aspect to these businesses that are going to be enabled that institutions need to fund things and realize that there's some probability they won't work, but that learning, back to Tom's point with move fast and break things and possibly fail, it has to be part of the lexicon, otherwise these things never get off the launch pad.
Thank you. All right, and we're going to open it up for questions. I ask that if you ask a question, state your name, organization, then give us the question. Any?
So Andrew England from Intellect Design Arena. Just sort of picking up on the last comment from Tom, but also I think Alicia also early on made the comment that perhaps the challenge is the business, right? So with financial institutions having to make so many decisions in terms of where they invest, I suppose from an audience perspective, there is the question of, well, what's the likely way in which this type of technology can be signed off on in an institution? And maybe, in the context of CYBOS, which is around securities, cash management, trade, how do we think that is actually going to play out?
Who wants to take that one?
Well, I'll take a stab. I think.
Alicia, did you have something to
sorry,
say?
did you say it? No, go.
Thank you. The way I see this is that it's going to have to be building on an efficiency. That's the way I see this. That banks will implement this technology when it comes with not just efficiency, either a significant efficiency or simplification, or that there is a gain in a customer experience. And I know this sounds very, customer experience, but it's true. I think banks we're all running probably to the customer are from our costs, capital and operating costs. So the way how banks could make this real, I see some cases. It's going to have to start with something simple. I see FX confirmation, for example, and I see the efficiency angle in there. I see payments, and I see the customer experience angle in that one. So I think it's going to come from that, running away from your cost or efficiency and going towards your customer experience, and it's going to have to start with something very, very, very simple.
Blythe, did you want to say something on that one?
I think I agree with that. I just would say that the other channel is that a central entity, think market infrastructure provider, whose job is to provide infrastructure to the market, which means the various banks and others that they interact with, will essentially be in the best position to roll out as a candidate a solution that has blockchain aspects. And typically, the process via which that happens involves extensive stakeholder engagement. In some cases, like CLS, they're owned by their customers. In other cases, they're not. But all of them have different mechanisms for engaging directly with their customers. And usually, the dialogue is around the extent of change, the benefits that the change brings, security, so lots of interaction with the enterprise architects and security officers. The cost traded off against the benefits, and but there the organizing force comes from the market infrastructure, who at the end of the day has to offer a mechanism for accessing post-trade in cash equities or in treasury repo and so on. And at the end of the day, there are systems that have to provide the business service, and as those systems evolve and adopt characteristics of blockchain technology, they are going to be rolled out by those central technology providers and operators, market operators. This is one of the reasons why, as a firm, we have focused on servicing market infrastructures, because they represent a natural point of integration and distribution for the software. So that's how I think you're going to see it start to play out. And in addition to the customer-driven or bank or even buy-side-driven solutions, which are more dispersed or perhaps more entity-specific. But the networks, I think, are going to have to start from the center and migrate out.
I think we have time for just one more question. Is there any out there? Well, no more questions, but I have one last one in interest of squeezing every last drop of value out of this panel. Just very quickly, private blockchains, permission blockchains, there has been a lot of question about their scalability. And I'm going to go down the line, and I'm curious, how many peers have you scaled one of your distributed ledgers up to? Like, how large have you been able to make one of these networks work so far? Just curious. And you can say no comment if it's an operational.
Going back to my earlier point about, and to what Blythe was talking about, which is the stepwise growth of the network. It just doesn't happen in a big bang. I think when we've spoken to some of our big customers, let's put it this way, we're dealing with big financial institutions who want to run big scale applications and things like payments. We've satisfied their concerns about throughput. One of our exchanges, they asked us to run an entire day's worth of order activity through our system, and recorded how long it would take to actually record that into the blockchain. And that was millions of transactions, and that was done to their satisfaction. So you do get into interesting issues when you start to scale the network and you deal with what is the consensus mechanism and how does that degrade performance or other things. But suffice it to say, and to Alicia's earlier point, the technology's there, it will only get better, and our customers believe that.
So your answer is you're growing, but you're not going to tell me how large? Blythe.
Well, I think your question implies that the measurement of scale is a function of how many entities you have connected, and then in turn you need then to specify what do you mean by that, because are you talking about how many entities acting as writers to a blockchain, which in turn requires a consensus methodology?
Yes.
Or are you talking about something different? So the answer is it depends, but on what you mean.
Yes, I get that.
But where you have a single writer to a blockchain because you have a centralized system, but hundreds, if not thousands, of participants who are operating nodes, who are independently validating and cryptographically signing transactions and so on, the answer is that up to these systems that we're working on have been scaled up to the scale of, for example, the 10th largest stock market in the world in terms of numbers of transactions that are capable of being processed using that technology designed that way.
That's the kind of answer I was looking for. So that's impressive. Sorry to run you through that. But we're almost out of time, 30 seconds left. Yeah. Anybody want to talk about this?
Like I said before, it's really easy to sit on panels with Tom and
you agree?
And I agree. Look, there's a ton of money that's being thrown at different applications and different developments, and some of the smartest people in the world are working on this. So this is an engineering problem. It'll get worked out, and it really depends on the business solution. Right. I don't think it's a limiting factor for the future.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and I'd like to thank my panel.
Thank you.